One day, I will tell you a story that will touch your heart and soul. It's the story of a Muslim girl. After her death, dogs would always bark at her grave, dig it up, and even urinate on it. But what had this Muslim girl done for dogs to behave this way? After some time, her grave opened up with no apparent reason. What sin had she committed to deserve such a punishment? The truth was eventually revealed, and the entire village was shocked when they heard it. Follow along to discover every detail of this story. But before we continue, please support us, like the video and write Ameen in the comments. In a small village where most of the people lived in poverty, there was a girl named Layla. She had been beautiful since childhood. When she was only 4 years old, her parents died in a tragic accident. She had no one in the world but her uncle and his wife. However, her aunt didn't want her around, and her uncle, who could barely provide for his 4 children, wanted to take care of Layla, but was not allowed to by his wife. In that same village lived an old woman, poor and nearly deaf, who relied on the charity of others. When her clothes tore, she asked for new ones from neighbors. When she was hungry, she went door to door, asking for food. Sometimes, she worked small jobs to earn a little money. She lived in a small clay house, humble and quiet. When she heard that Layla was orphaned and had nowhere to go, she rejoiced and took her in. The old woman used to say, "If God provides for me, surely He will not forget her." She remembered, "When Layla first entered my home, I was afraid. But to my surprise, she prayed from the age of 4 and joined me in every prayer." Layla was a bright and understanding child. The old woman would bring clay home and Layla would play with it, crafting little clay toys. One day, Layla told the old woman, "Mother, I want to learn the Quran." She began her studies and, in a few years, memorized the entire Quran by heart. She recited the surahs like a pilgrim and had a deep love for knowledge and faith. Their house had low walls, and Layla could see students from the religious seminary passing by. She befriended one of them, and he became her friend. She invited him and his classmates into her home, and they would play with clay together. At the same time, she would teach them the same lessons taught at the seminary. Over time, Layla not only memorized the Quran, but also learned how to read and write. She began reading religious and academic books. Layla was not only educated, but lived by what she learned. The old woman raised her in the best way possible. As Layla grew older, her beauty began to attract attention. The women in the village would whisper, "She's a houri from paradise." She was so innocent that she barely knew the outside world. The old woman had grown frail and could no longer go out asking for help, but the villagers began supporting her out of respect for Layla. One day, a wealthy man who owned a farm came to propose marriage on behalf of his son. But the old woman told him, "You know, my son is already supported by my daughter." The man, who was kind-hearted, left the house without another word. Layla used to teach children from the neighborhood about the Quran. One young man would often stand outside and listen to her lessons. He tried to catch a glimpse of her several times, but she was always behind a curtain. Over time, he fell in love with her. His love transformed his life. He began to perform all 5 daily prayers and grew closer to God. He wanted to propose to her, but fear held him back. As the month of Ramadan approached, Layla told the old woman she called her mother, "I will fast the entire Ramadan. I'll wake myself up, but if I get a headache and fail to wake, please wake me." On the first day of Ramadan, devastating news spread. Layla had passed away. When the young man heard the news, it felt as though his soul had left his body. He told himself, "How can I believe she's gone? Just yesterday, she was teaching the Quran and speaking about Ramadan." When he arrived at Layla's home, he was confronted with the truth. Layla had truly left this world. He wanted to scream with all his might, but he had no right to mourn openly or say anything. People gathered for the funeral, but no one knew how she had died. Layla's foster mother wept uncontrollably, telling people that Layla had been kind and pious. Everyone agreed she was pure and innocent. The young man could only cry in silence, saying to himself, "She left this world and left me behind, burning with sorrow. If only I had spoken to her once. If only I had told her what was in my heart, perhaps things would have turned out differently." Strangely, after Layla's death, the young man began visiting her grave every day. He noticed something odd. Dogs would gather around her grave, digging at it and behaving in strange, disturbing ways. He wondered, why only Layla's grave? There are many others here. Why hers? He chased the dogs away daily and tried to keep the area clean, but they kept returning. The dogs were fierce, and sometimes a foul stench rose from the grave, so strong that it became unbearable to sit nearby. The young man who loved her couldn't sleep, tormented by thoughts. Every night before dawn, he visited her grave and asked himself, if I had just one chance to speak to her, could our story have been different? But each time he approached the grave, wild dogs would suddenly appear from the darkness, stopping at the grave and staring at him with glowing eyes. He tried to drive them away, but they seemed to be searching for something. He began to question himself. Are these dogs here because of my feelings for her? Could my silent love have caused this torment to her grave? These questions haunted him. He wondered, if I stop visiting her grave, will the dogs go away? He remembered how, after her death, he had done everything he could to keep her resting place dignified. But each night, he witnessed the same disturbing scenes. The dogs seemed determined to desecrate her grave. He kept asking, why only Layla? The question tortured him. He cried in silence, remembering the days when he could hear her footsteps from afar and imagined her face in his mind. Now, those memories only caused him pain. He began to doubt himself. Are these dogs here because of me? Because of something unspoken? Could this be a sign of a sin I never confessed? These thoughts suffocated him, and he decided to stop visiting the grave. But every time he tried to stay away, he felt as though he were abandoning Layla alone in the dark. That feeling was the worst of all. There weren't many people in the village, so news traveled fast. The elders and religious leaders gathered and began discussing the reasons why dogs kept coming to the grave of a girl once considered so kind and innocent, and why they behaved in such vile ways. Though the young man chased the dogs away every day, they never stayed gone for long. The elders began saying, surely this girl must have committed a grave sin for her grave to be in such a state. One man stood and said, I don't believe this girl was innocent or righteous. If she was so beautiful, then she must have had a secret. They say she was the most beautiful girl in the village, yet her home was crumbling, and she had no one but a blind old woman. Even her house's walls were in ruins. He continued, some sins are so great that punishment comes even after death. I believe this girl was far from pure. It's impossible for someone to be so beautiful and be entirely without sin. Just because she wore a headscarf doesn't mean she was innocent. There are women who cover their faces and wear modest clothes, but inside, they're completely corrupted. The young man who loved Layla heard all these words, and his heart burned. He asked himself, why are people so cruel? One day, the entire village gathered and decided, maybe she committed a serious sin. We need to uncover the truth, because her wrongdoing could bring misfortune upon us all. They said, the only person who knows what really happened is the blind old woman who raised her. The children she had taught the Quran insisted, we never saw her do anything wrong. In this village, whenever something strange happened, people always looked for someone to blame. Now, they began to suspect the young man who came to the grave every day and wept. They said, maybe there was something between them. The village elders and religious figures held a community trial. They brought the young man forward and asked, "What was your connection with her?" He answered, "I loved her, but I never told her. She didn't even know I existed." But the villagers didn't believe him and started shouting, "You're guilty, you did something to her." The young man cried out, "Don't accuse her unfairly. She was a good and righteous girl. I swear by God there was nothing between us. I simply loved her silently and always believed I wasn't worthy of her. That's why I never approached her." Some of the villagers stood in his defense, saying, "He's telling the truth. Love is not a sin. He doesn't seem to have done anything wrong." The hearings continued and the debates grew more intense. Then one day, a handsome young man arrived at the gathering, someone nobody had seen at previous meetings. The first young man asked, "Who is he?" They told him, "That's the son of Imam Marcus, the village's most respected cleric." The young man thought to himself, "Praise be to God. The son of Imam Marcus is so handsome. If Layla had lived, he would have been worthy of her. Her beauty was rare and didn't suit an ordinary man, but strangely, the cleric's son seemed agitated and Imam Marcus often followed his advice, even though it was clear the young man had little understanding of anything. They said his name was Elijah and that he had recently returned from abroad. A few days later, the young man once again visited Layla's grave, only to find the situation had worsened. The dogs had become more aggressive, attacking the grave more frequently. The stench had become unbearable, so foul that no one could approach it without gagging. The young man, who still loved her deeply, began bringing stones and flowers each day, trying to reinforce the grave, to protect it, to beautify it. But nothing changed. Then, something completely unexpected happened. He saw something that left him stunned. The grave, which had been completely sealed, was now broken open. It was clear that it had been disturbed from within. People began to whisper, "Her grave is falling apart." Everyone became convinced. This situation had gone beyond anything natural. The only person who might hold the truth was the old woman who had raised Layla. The young man said, "We all went to her house, and she began crying as soon as we arrived." Layla's foster mother started to speak through her tears, telling them about her daughter. If she weren't a good person, why did she die during Ramadan? But others responded, "Many people died during Ramadan. That doesn't mean they were all righteous. Some died during the pilgrimage, on the 15th of Rabi al-Awwal, or during the night of power. It doesn't guarantee virtue." They insisted, "We need to look inside Layla's room. Maybe we'll find something that will tell us the truth." The old woman replied through her sobs, "Since the day she died, I haven't touched her room. I locked the door and never opened it again." But the village council pressed her, saying, "We must open it. Perhaps the answers lie inside." Though the old woman was reluctant, they insisted. When they opened the door, they were surprised by what they saw. Everything was tidy and serene. An old bed, a small chair, and a wooden chest filled with worn clothes. There was nothing else, as Layla had been very poor. The bed was covered with faded blankets, and everything showed signs of use and age. But when they looked under the bed, they found something that shocked everyone. It was something valuable, something that raised far more questions than it answered. How could such a poor girl have owned something like this? One of the men took it and brought it to the village elders. It was a gold necklace, heavy and clearly made for a man. The entire village began asking, what is the real story behind Layla's death? How did she really die? That night, while the village was quiet and the wind rustled softly through the trees, strange things began happening in the graveyard. People claimed that just before dawn, savage dogs would suddenly appear and stare at Layla's grave with glowing eyes, then flee in terror, barking as if they had seen something beyond human comprehension. Some villagers who approached the cemetery reported sensing a strange odor, sometimes like burning flesh, other times like the stench of a decaying animal. But what terrified them most happened on a night when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds and not a single beam of light illuminated the earth. One of the bravest men in the village decided to go to the graveyard with a lantern. As he approached Layla's grave, the lantern suddenly went out. No matter what he did, it wouldn't light again. Then he heard a faint sound, soft and sorrowful, coming from her grave. It was like the groan of someone in pain. He froze in place, listening. The sound resembled someone softly reciting a verse from the Quran in a low voice. Terrified, the man turned and ran back to the village as fast as he could. The next morning, the villagers gathered again and decided to open Layla's grave to uncover the truth. But just before that, the discovery of the gold necklace in her room had silenced the entire village. The old woman, with a trembling voice, repeated her words. Layla was in her room, and I was in the other. When dawn came, I entered and found her lying there without movement. I screamed and called the neighbors, and when they arrived, they said her heart had stopped. But no one knew how or why it happened. The next day, the community held another assembly. Everyone awaited the verdict of the village's senior elder. Imam Marcus arrived, but his son Elijah was noticeably absent. The villagers murmured, "This girl had no father, no mother, not even a brother. She taught children the Quran and memorized the Book of God. So where did such an expensive necklace come from?" They wondered, could someone have given it to her? But if it was a gift, wouldn't it have been stored in her chest instead of thrown on the ground? Everyone began speculating. Then one of the younger men, who was sharper than the rest, stood and said, "I figured it out. Give me one day, and tomorrow I'll reveal the truth." The next day, the entire village assembled again. The senior elder came, this time accompanied by his son. The young man stood and addressed the crowd. "I know who this necklace belongs to." Faces turned tense, and the air thickened with anticipation. He continued, "The girl you all accused, the one you tried to dishonor, she was completely innocent. This necklace belongs to the one responsible for her death, the one who tarnished her honor. Layla couldn't speak up, and that's why she left this world in silence. That wicked man is among us. This necklace belongs to none other than Elijah, the son of Imam Marcus. No one else in this village owns such a valuable chain brought from abroad except him." Imam Marcus turned to his son and demanded he speak the truth. Elijah stood before the assembly, visibly angry, and said coldly, "I loved Layla. I even proposed marriage to her, but she rejected me and told me to my face, 'You may be rich, but you have no honor. I'm poor, but I'm respected. I have dignity, and I can never be with someone like you.' She humiliated me and shattered my pride." He paused, then continued, "So I did what I did. After she died, I wanted to hear her voice again, so I sent the dogs to her grave. I entered her home at midnight, while the old woman slept in the other room and couldn't hear anything. I wanted to completely destroy her name. At the very moment she was praying, I snatched the necklace from her neck and left. After that, she passed away." The villagers were struck dumb. No one could utter a word. Time itself seemed to stand still. Imam Marcus, a man who had spent his whole life building his reputation and amassing wealth, lifted his hands to the sky and said in a calm but deeply meaningful voice, "God is witness. I struggled my entire life for this status and fortune, but now I see none of it matters." He turned to the people, his voice shaking. You have the right to punish him. He is my son, but justice must prevail." The people looked at one another, their faces full of grief and anger. The young man who had loved Layla, who had spent his days at her grave, began to cry, tears streaming from his eyes. He said, "I never understood why Layla had to leave this world, but now I see that our world is full of people with beautiful faces but rotten hearts. Layla, though poor, kept her dignity, and we, who claim to stand for justice, couldn't even protect her from injustice." The village council, filled with both sorrow and righteous fury, quickly decided that Elijah had to be punished. The villagers, simple, humble people, chose not revenge, but a lesson he would never forget. The senior elder, wise and steady, stood and declared, "In our village, we follow a law rooted in justice and faith. Elijah, you were wealthy, but your heart was empty of compassion. Now it's time for you to face yourself and learn the true value of life." Elijah, who had once arrogantly defended himself, lowered his head, tears falling down his cheeks. "I regret it. I regret everything," he said. "But now it's too late. I've lost Layla, and there is nothing in this world that can bring her back." The elder continued, "Your punishment will be public repentance. You must stand before the entire village and confess how far you fell from humanity. Then you will serve this community for 1 full year without pay, helping every household with their needs. Maybe then a portion of your sin will be washed away." Elijah lifted his head, eyes full of remorse, his hands trembling. "I accept," he whispered. "I accept, and I only hope that God forgives me." After that, the villagers came together to restore Layla's grave. The young man who had loved her began to work every night, placing beautiful stones and planting flowers she had once said she liked. He placed a small plaque at the head of her grave that read, "Layla, a noble daughter who, despite poverty, preserved her humanity." From that day forward, the people of the village began to remember the lesson of Layla's life. They realized that money and social standing do not define a person's worth. It is humanity and honor that make someone truly valuable. On some nights, they said, the scent of roses could be smelled rising from her grave. The young man who had loved her prayed every night. "Layla," he would whisper, "I hope you're at peace now. I will never forget you." A year later, after completing his public penance, Elijah returned to the village and visited Layla's grave, now transformed into a symbol of justice and dignity. He stood there, eyes full of tears, and said, "Layla, I hope God forgives me. Now I understand that humanity matters more than anything else in life." This story, he said, was a lesson for all of them, that wealth and power do not define value. Layla, though poor, became a symbol of faith and righteousness. Elijah, once rich but devoid of morality, had received a harsh lesson in life. This story reminds us all, every action reflects who we truly are, and we must always strive to hold on to our humanity and honor. Elijah, in the end, admitted, "If I hadn't done it, she would have exposed me." And the father of the young man who had loved Layla, a just man, stood and said, "Justice must be done." The villagers decided Elijah must be punished, and in the end, he received a just sentence and became a living example for everyone. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story, one that holds a lesson for us all. We'll meet again with another story soon. Peace be with you.